Time for sound design. In today's video, I'm gonna discuss the 3 things I think about when creating a patch from scratch on a subtractive synthesizer. So I do use presets sometimes, but often I create my own sounds from scratch. So I load up a synthesizer, either a software synthesizer in Ableton or a hardware synthesizer, create the init patch, the initialize state of the synthesizer, and then I start creating a sound. And the 3 aspects I think about are color, time, and movement. And thinking about these 3 aspects help me to create the sound that I want to create. So what I will do in this video, I will go to Ableton, use the drift synthesizer to demonstrate each of these aspects and how I go about creating a synthesizer patch. Let's go to Ableton and start with the first aspect, color. So when I think about color and a subtractive synthesizer, I basically think about 3 different aspects. The oscillators, the mixer section, so how do you blend more than one oscillator if you use more than one, and the filter or filters in this case. So with these 3 aspects of a subtractive synthesizer, you can shape the color of the sound. So let's start with one oscillator. And if we go with a sine wave, there's not a lot of overtones, it's kind of a muted sound. But if we pick a ramp, there's much more overtones. So if you look at the EQ here, or if you look at the spectrum analyzer, you see that there's much more going on here versus the sine wave. And of course, if you take a square wave, and then there's the shape parameter here, there are different options, and then you can blend in oscillator 2. So let's blend it in at -9. And now this oscillator is at -1 octave -1. So the choice of oscillator is really like, do you want a bright sound with a lot of overtones, something more muted? Do you want oscillators that are the same, or you want only one oscillator and make it really fat? And of course then on many subtractive synthesizer, there's one other sound source, which is noise. So if you already want to dirty it up. And the last part of color is the filter. So when I think about color, I think about bright sounds versus kind of muted sounds. And this is where the filter really comes in handy to filter out frequencies. And in this case, we have a low pass and a high pass filter. So we can basically use it as a band pass. So we can create really sort of narrow sounds frequency wise. But we can also go up all the way and say we filter out all the low end. Or the opposite, we filter out all the high end. So once I've created something with the oscillator mix, and the filter that I like, I will move on to the next aspect. And just as a side note, I don't necessarily start with the oscillator, so with the color, time, movement. Sometimes I start with the time because I already know very specifically that's what kind of sound I want. So it's not like you have to follow this order. You actually can start the way you want. But let's move on to aspect number 2, which is time. And time is basically, if you think about music, it's always about time, like how, you're always going from A to B. And with time, it's really about the time that a note or a sequence of notes takes. So when it comes to a subtractive synthesizer like this, it's about the envelope, the ADSR envelope, attack, decay, sustain, release. And here you can really set like how long does a sound like a note take. So if I hold down a note and the sustain is at 70, it will continue. If I want a short sound, I take the sustain down and I have a very short sound. If I increase the decay, but if I decrease it, I have a very short sound. And then is the question, do you want something that immediately starts, so with a low decay, or something that kind of fades in? And then the release, like after you release your hands from the keyboard, how long does it continue? And part of the time aspect for me is also the arpeggiator, because you can have a very short note, but you can repeat that note. So if you have this kind of note, if you add an arpeggiator, you'll repeat it. And if you hold down two notes, so that's for me really a part of the time parameter. It's both the envelope, so how long does a single note take and how does it come in and how does it go out, but also do you repeat that note? And often actually when I start making a patch from scratch, I often start with the envelope because I think it's the easiest part sort of to get right, because often I know at least I want a short sound or a long sound or something that slowly comes in like a pad, or I want some like a bass or like a lead that's a bit more aggressive and right there. So it's an easy part to dial in, and it's only 4 parameters basically, so it's quick to shape the sound that you want. All right, moving on to the last parameter, and that is movement, and this is maybe the most fun one. So I guess the technical term is modulation. So if you only create a sound and you look at the color and the time, you create a sound that's fairly static. It just repeats the same way. So what you want to do is create some variation, some movement in this sound over time. There are 2 ways to do that, either with an envelope or with an LFO. Or in Ableton you can of course also draw an automation of parameters, but then it's not in the actual patch. So let's focus on the LFO for now. And what you can do with an LFO is assign parameters to move. So if we go to the mod tab here, let's assign the LFO to the filter cutoff. That's the low pass frequency, this one. And then the amount, we up the amount, turn off the arpeggiator. So now the LFO is turning down the filter and the frequency here is 0.4 Hertz. So I think it's a bit too much. Let's lower it a bit. And what we can do is we can assign the same LFO to another parameter. So I'm thinking the shape of oscillator 1. And let's choose a musical time sync. So let's do 3/4 of a bar. Let's do 1 bar. So you can already hear that there's there's movement in the sound. So both in the oscillator as well as in the filter. But you can go even further and say like, I want also the time parameter to be modulated. And for this, I'm going to use a LFO, separate LFO. And let's say we're going to modulate the attack parameter a little bit. But now every time I trigger a new note, it has a different attack time. Color, time, and movement are the three aspects that I use when approaching a subtractive synthesizer, and I use that to think about the sound that I want to create and then look at the different parameters and make that in the synthesizer that I have in front of me. Of course, there's more aspects to the synthesizer. For instance, like what is the polyphony? Is it a monophonic sound, polyphonic sound, unison? How many voices do you assign? In this case, there's a drift parameter and some other sort of more advanced settings. But with these three aspects, color, time, movement, you can get the bulk of your sound done. When you have that, then I usually start thinking about effects, reverb, delay, distortion, all those kind of things. So this is only to get the basic of the sound in the synthesizer done. Let me know how you approach creating a patch from scratch in a subtractive synthesizer. How do you think about the different aspects of a sound and how do you translate that into an actual sound in a synthesizer? Thank you for watching. Keep making music and see you in the next one.